It all started with flashing red and blue lights bouncing off my living room walls. I hadn't done anything wrong. At least, I didn't think I had. But when I peeked through the blinds and saw two officers stepping out of their cruiser, hands resting on their belts like they were about to handle a real crime, my stomach dropped. Was this some mistake? A misunderstanding? I took a deep breath, opened the door, and that's when I heard the words that made my brain short-circuit. "Sir, we received a complaint about your mailbox." I blinked. My mailbox? What kind of complaint could possibly involve the police? I looked past the officers, and there she was. Arms crossed, face pinched like she'd just sucked on a lemon. Karen, my neighbor, my nightmare. She was already talking at full speed, pointing at my mailbox like it was a crime scene. "It's the wrong color," she shrieked. "It doesn't match the HOA guidelines. He's ruining the aesthetic of the neighborhood." Now, let me back up for a second. I had just moved into this community a few months ago. It was one of those perfectly manicured, too good to be true neighborhoods where people cared more about the length of your grass than actual crime. I had no issues with my neighbors, except for one, Karen. From the moment I moved in, she made it her personal mission to enforce rules that didn't even exist. And this time, she had really outdone herself. The officers exchanged a look. One of them sighed and pulled out a notepad, while the other stepped closer. "Sir, is there a reason you chose this color?" he asked, sounding like he didn't even believe the words coming out of his own mouth. I glanced at my mailbox. It was a deep navy blue, sleek, modern, and in my opinion, completely inoffensive. Because I like it?" I answered. Karen gasped like I had confessed to burning down the neighborhood. "This is a violation," she screeched. "The HOA clearly states that all mailboxes must be neutral colors, white, beige, gray, but this..." She jabbed a finger at it, shaking with rage. "This is a disgrace." Here's the thing. I had read the HOA guidelines. Nowhere did it say anything about mailbox colors. But Karen loved making up rules and hoping no one would question her. I turned back to the officers. "That's not in the guidelines," I said. "She's making it up." The second officer rubbed his temple like he had been through this kind of thing before. "Do you have a copy of the rules?" he asked. I nodded, stepping inside to grab my HOA packet. When I returned, I flipped straight to the section about home aesthetics and pointed. "See? No mention of mailboxes." Karen wasn't having it. "It's an unwritten rule," she snapped. "Everyone else follows it." She waved her arms dramatically toward the other houses, as if they were proof of her point. Sure, most of the mailboxes were white or beige, but that was by choice, not law. The officer sighed again. "Ma'am, an unwritten rule isn't something we can enforce." Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red. She stomped her foot like an angry toddler. But it doesn't match. It's ruining the uniformity. This is a nice neighborhood. We have standards." At this point, I was torn between laughing and being genuinely concerned for her blood pressure. The officers, clearly fed up, turned back to me. "Sir, you're not breaking any laws. We're sorry for the inconvenience." Karen let out a choked noise, as if she physically couldn't believe what she was hearing. "So, you're just going to let him get away with this?" she spat. The first officer, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. "Ma'am, this is not a police matter. Please don't call 911 over non-emergencies again." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She looked at me, at the officers, then at the mailbox, as if she expected it to apologize. Then, with a dramatic huff, she turned on her heel and stomped back to her house, muttering about standards and no respect for rules. As the officers walked back to their cruiser, one of them glanced over his shoulder and smirked. "Nice mailbox." I grinned. "Thanks." But as I watched Karen's curtains twitch, I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. You know those neighborhoods where everything looks like it was copy-pasted from a suburban catalog? Perfectly mowed lawns, driveways so clean you could eat off them, and neighbors who wave at you but secretly judge your choice of porch furniture? Yeah, that's my neighborhood. It's a place where the biggest crime isn't burglary. It's daring to step outside the sacred unwritten laws of the homeowners association. And if there's one person who enforces these rules with an iron fist, it's Karen. Karen isn't just any neighbor. She's the self-appointed sheriff of our cul-de-sac. She doesn't need a badge or a uniform. Her power comes from the sheer force of her entitlement. She lives for confrontation. If your grass is 1 inch too high, she's at your door. If your trash cans are left out 5 minutes past pickup time, you'll find an anonymous but suspiciously detailed complaint letter in your mailbox. She is the HOA, even though she technically holds no actual position. So when I decided to paint my mailbox navy blue, I should have known I was committing a felony in Karen's mind. I thought it was a small, harmless change, something to add a little personality to my otherwise cookie-cutter home. But as it turns out, in a world where beige and white reigned supreme, my navy blue mailbox was a declaration of war. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a letter taped to my door. Not in an envelope, not mailed, just aggressively slapped onto my door with an alarming amount of tape. The handwriting was in all caps, written with the kind of precision that suggested someone had practiced this many times before. It read, "Your mailbox is in violation of neighborhood standards. Fix it immediately or face consequences." There was no signature, no HOA letterhead, just the vague, mafia-style threat of consequences. I sighed, already knowing exactly who was behind it. Karen. It had to be Karen. Now, a normal person would have maybe knocked on my door and had a conversation like an adult. But no, not Karen. Karen operated in passive-aggressive warfare. She preferred cryptic warnings, dramatic letters, and, as I would soon learn, 911 calls over mailbox colors. I ignored the note because, well, I'm an adult who refuses to be bullied over a piece of metal on a post. But ignoring Karen is like ignoring a wasp nest. Sure, you might avoid the problem for a bit, but sooner or later, they're gonna come for you. The escalation began that same evening. As I took out my trash, I spotted her standing at the edge of her driveway, arms crossed, staring directly at my mailbox like it had personally insulted her ancestors. It wasn't just a glance either. She was full-on glaring. "Evening, Karen," I said, trying to act normal. She didn't respond. She just scoffed. The next morning, I found a printed copy of our HOA guidelines in my mailbox. A completely unnecessary move, considering I already had my own copy. But Karen, being Karen, had gone through the trouble of highlighting random sections to make it look like I was in violation of some sacred law. Except, none of them actually mentioned mailbox colors. That's when I knew. Karen wasn't just mad, she was on a mission. 2 days later, I woke up to find 3 more identical letters taped to my front door, all written in the same psychotic all-caps handwriting. Each one was getting more aggressive. "This is your final warning. Do you really want to be the neighbor who ruins our community? Think of the children. Think of the children? What? Were they going to be permanently scarred by the sight of a navy blue mailbox? Would they grow up confused and emotionally unstable because they weren't exposed to beige mailboxes only?" I crumpled up the letters and threw them away, and that, my friends, was my biggest mistake, because the next morning, at exactly 8:12 a.m., Karen called the police. Let me say that again. Karen called the police over a mailbox. I didn't know this at first. All I knew was that I woke up to the sound of sirens. Yes, sirens. Groggy and confused, I stumbled to the window and saw 2 cop cars parked outside my house. For a split second, my brain short-circuited. Had I done something illegal in my sleep? Did I have a secret life as a fugitive that I wasn't aware of? Then I saw Karen, standing on her lawn, arms folded, talking to an actual police officer. She looked smug, too smug. I barely had time to process this insanity before there was a knock on my door. Still in my pajama pants and a t-shirt that said "Sarcasm loading, please wait," I opened it. 2 officers stood there, looking about as unamused as you'd expect officers responding to a mailbox emergency to look. "Sir," one of them began, in a tone that suggested he already regretted being here, "your neighbor has made a complaint about your mailbox." I stared at him, then at the other officer, then at Karen, who was watching from her yard like she had just won the neighborhood Hunger Games. "My mailbox?" I repeated, making sure I had heard correctly. The officer cleared his throat, clearly embarrassed on behalf of his entire profession. "Yes, ma'am, sorry. Your neighbor insists that your mailbox is in violation of HOA regulations." I blinked. "It's not." The second officer sighed. "That's what we figured, but she insisted we come check it out." I glanced at Karen again. She was standing there smiling, like she had just solved a murder case. "Sir," the first officer continued, sounding about one sentence away from quitting his job, "we're going to ask you nicely. Can you show us the HOA rules?" I nodded, disappearing inside to grab my copy. The moment I brought it out and flipped to the home aesthetic section, both officers visibly deflated. I pointed at the part where it mentioned absolutely nothing about mailbox colors. One of them exhaled loudly, as if he had been holding in frustration since the moment they arrived. "Ma'am," he called over his shoulder to Karen, "there's no rule about mailbox colors." Karen gasps, full-on gasps. But, that's not how it's supposed to be," she stammers, voice reaching a pitch only dogs can hear. "We all agreed on neutral colors. This is an unspoken rule." Both officers exchanged the universal cop look of, "Oh my God, we're dealing with a crazy one." "Ma'am," one of them says, pinching the bridge of his nose, "we don't enforce unspoken rules. Please don't call 911 for neighborhood disputes again." Karen looked like someone had told her Santa wasn't real. She kept opening and closing her mouth like she was searching for some legal loophole that didn't exist. But before she could argue further, the officers gave me a tired nod and walked back to their cars. As they pulled away, Karen turned to me, eyes blazing with the rage of 1,000 beige mailboxes. "This isn't over," she hissed. I grinned. "Oh, I know." And it wasn't. Because the next day, I had an idea. I went online and ordered a second mailbox, a bigger, bolder, even bluer mailbox, and when it arrived, I put it right next to the first one. Karen nearly exploded. I should have known something was wrong the moment I moved into this neighborhood. There was something off about it. The streets were too clean, the houses too uniform, the lawns too perfectly trimmed, as if some unseen force was ensuring everything remained exactly the same. At first, I thought it was just a particularly aggressive HOA. I had no idea that what I was dealing with was something far more sinister, something that lurked beneath the surface of suburban perfection. And it all started with my mailbox. It arrived on a crisp Saturday morning, a navy blue mailbox that I had personally picked out, excited to add just a little personality to my otherwise bland cookie-cutter home. I installed it without a second thought. A small rebellion in a sea of white and beige mailboxes. But the moment I stepped back to admire my handiwork, I felt it. That creeping sensation of being watched. At first, I chalked it up to paranoia, but then I turned my head and saw her, Karen. She stood across the street, staring at my mailbox with a look of absolute horror. Her face was pale, eyes wide, mouth slightly open like she had just witnessed something unspeakable. Slowly, her gaze lifted to meet mine, and I swear to God, I felt a chill run down my spine. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. A nervous chuckle escaped me. Done what?" Her fingers curled into fists. "You changed it." I blinked, glancing at my mailbox, then back at her. "Yeah? And?" Her lips pressed together in a tight, bloodless line. Without another word, she turned on her heel and marched back into her house. But not before I saw something that made my stomach twist. From the shadows of her front window, I saw movement. A figure, watching, waiting. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. My dreams were strange. I saw rows upon rows of identical mailboxes, stretching endlessly into the darkness. I heard whispers, soft at first, then growing louder, chanting in unison. Uniformity, order, obey. My dream self wandered through the maze of mailboxes, hands brushing against their cold metal surfaces, until finally, I came across something different. My navy blue mailbox. It stood out like a beacon of defiance, and then I heard the screaming. I woke up drenched in sweat. My heart was racing. My room was dark, eerily silent. But something wasn't right. The air felt heavier. And then from outside I heard it. A soft scraping sound. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly I sat up, straining to listen. The scraping continued, rhythmic, deliberate, like something was being dragged across the pavement. My stomach twisted into a knot as I forced myself out of bed and crept toward the window. With trembling fingers, I pulled back the curtain and felt my blood turn to ice. Karen stood in my driveway. She wasn't alone. Behind her, lined up in eerie silence, were my neighbors. all of them standing perfectly still, dressed in their matching beige and white sweaters, their faces blank, eyes void of emotion, and in their hands, paintbrushes. I stepped back from the window, my pulse hammering in my ears. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. My mind scrambled for an explanation, but before I could process what was happening, the doorbell rang. Ding dong, ding dong. The chime echoed through my house, unnatural in the dead silence of the night. It rang again, and again, and again, faster, more frantic, until it was no longer ringing but pounding, as if the entire house was shaking under the force of it. I backed away. My instinct screamed at me to run, but then the whispering began, from all around me, from the vents, from the walls, from the very ground beneath my feet. Uniformity, order, obey. I slammed my hands over my ears. My head was spinning. This wasn't happening. This was a nightmare. But then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The house fell silent. The pounding at the door ceased. The whispers faded. For a long moment, I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And then, cautiously, I crept toward the front door and peered through the peephole. Nothing. No Karen, no neighbors, just my empty driveway, bathed in the glow of the streetlights. I exhaled a shaky breath and unlocked the door, slowly cracking it open. My yard was undisturbed. Everything looked normal. Had I imagined it? Was I losing my mind? And then I saw it. My mailbox. It was white. The breath left my lungs in a choked gasp. My hands trembled as I reached out, fingers grazing the smooth, cold surface. The deep navy blue was gone, replaced with a sterile, soulless white. I stumbled back, heart pounding. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But before I could fully process what had happened, I felt it again. That suffocating sensation of being watched. I turned my head, and there she was, Karen, standing on her porch, bathed in the eerie glow of her porch light. She was smiling, not a warm smile, not a friendly smile, but something else, something wrong. Much better, she murmured. And then she closed her door. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. The mailboxes, the endless rows, the whispering voices. And worse, I knew that if I tried to change it back, they would come again, but I wasn't going to let them win. The next morning, I went to the store and bought the biggest, brightest can of red paint I could find. If they thought they could scare me into submission, they had another thing coming. I was going to paint my mailbox red, blood red, and if they wanted to stop me, well, let them try. When I moved into this neighborhood, I thought I had finally made it. The perfect suburban home, a quiet street, friendly-looking neighbors who waved every morning as they watered their flower beds. It was a place straight out of one of those real estate commercials, the kind that sells you the dream of stability, of belonging. I should have known better. Perfection is never real. It's just a mask, stretched too tight over something rotten underneath. And I learned that the hard way, all because of my mailbox. It was navy blue. That's it. That was my crime. A mailbox that wasn't white or beige like the others. A simple rectangle of metal that somehow shattered the illusion of uniformity my neighbors had worked so hard to maintain. I didn't think it was a big deal. But Karen did. Karen was the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood. You know the type. The kind of woman who treats an HOA like it's her personal monarchy. Who walks around with a clipboard, peering into people's yards like she's searching for signs of rebellion. The first time she saw my mailbox, she stopped dead in her tracks. I was pulling weeds in my front yard when I heard it. That sharp inhale, like she had just witnessed a crime scene. I looked up. There she was, standing frozen on the sidewalk, staring at my mailbox like it had personally insulted her entire bloodline. "Oh dear," she muttered, shaking her head. "Oh no, 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 this won't do." I raised an eyebrow. What? She took a step closer, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Your mailbox," she said, her voice tight. "It's not regulation." I blinked. Regulation? The HOA guidelines clearly state that all mailboxes must be either white or beige. It's in the handbook. I let out a small laugh, thinking she had to be joking. "There's a handbook for mailboxes?" She did not laugh. Instead, she reached into her tote bag and pulled out a binder. A massive 3-ring binder filled with laminated pages. She flipped through them with the efficiency of someone who had spent way too much time memorizing every single rule. And then, with a triumphant smirk, she jabbed a perfectly manicured finger at a paragraph of text. All external fixtures, including but not limited to mailboxes, light posts, and fences, must maintain a neutral color scheme to uphold the aesthetic integrity of the community. She looked up at me, triumphant, as if she had just caught me in a lie. I stared at her, then at my mailbox, then back at her. Karen, it's just a mailbox. Her eye twitched. It's a violation. Of what? She sucked in a breath, nostrils flaring. Of order. I kid you not, she actually said it like that, with the same tone a villain in a dystopian movie would use. Of order. That should have been my first clue that this wasn't just about a mailbox. The next morning, I woke up to a letter taped to my door. A formal notice from the HOA, citing me for a visual disturbance. A visual disturbance. As if my navy blue mailbox was causing people physical distress. I crumpled it up and tossed it in the trash. But that was just the beginning. Later that day, I caught my next-door neighbor Tom staring at my house from his driveway. When he saw me, he gave me this awkward, forced smile. Hey, not trying to tell you what to do, but, you might want to just, change it. Keep things easy. Easy? I repeated. Yeah, Karen's been here for years. She doesn't like change. I laughed. Karen doesn't like a lot of things, apparently. He forced another smile, but his eyes darted toward her house like he was afraid she could hear us. Then he mumbled something about needing to mow his lawn and scurried inside. That night, I found another letter, this time stuffed into my mailbox. No envelope, just a single sheet of paper with the words, "Change it." No signature, no explanation, just change it. And I wish I could tell you that was the worst of it. The next day, I noticed the stares, not just from Karen, from everyone. The woman across the street paused mid-dog walk to glare at my mailbox like it had personally offended her. The guy who jogged past every morning slowed down, actually stopped, shook his head, and kept running. By the end of the week, it felt like the entire neighborhood had turned against me. And then, one night, I heard it. A scraping sound. It was past midnight. I was half asleep when the noise pulled me awake. A slow, deliberate scraping, like metal against metal. I sat up, heart pounding, pulled back the curtain, and there, standing in my yard, was Karen, holding a can of white paint. I threw the door open. Karen, what the hell? She gasped, nearly dropping the paint can. Oh dear, I was just... I stepped out onto the porch, and that's when I saw it. She had already started painting my mailbox. The front of it was now smeared in uneven streaks of white. You can't be serious, I said. Karen's hands trembled as she clutched the can. It's for the good of the neighborhood, she whispered. For the order. I took a slow step forward. Karen, if you don't put that paint down, I swear to... She bolted, dropped the brush, kicked over the can, and ran back to her house like she had just committed a felony. I stood there for a long time, staring at my half-painted mailbox, my mind racing. This wasn't just about a color, it was about control, about a system designed to punish anyone who didn't fit into their mold. This whole neighborhood was one giant performance, and the second you stepped out of line, they would do anything to force you back in. So, you know what I did? I went to the store, bought the brightest, most obnoxious shade of red paint I could find. And the next morning, in broad daylight, while Karen and the entire HOA watched from their porches in silent horror, I painted my mailbox blood red. It was glorious. The final straw. Karen called 911. I kid you not. She actually called the cops. On my mailbox. When the officer showed up, I could barely keep a straight face as she tried to explain the disturbance. The cop just stared at her, then at the mailbox, then back at her. Ma'am, he said, voice flat, this is not a crime. But the order, it's a mailbox. She turned bright red, sputtered something unintelligible, then stormed back inside. And the best part? She never spoke to me again. A week later, I saw a for sale sign in her yard. I guess she couldn't handle a neighborhood that didn't bow to her rules. And as I stood there, admiring my beautifully defiant red mailbox, I realized something. For the first time since moving here, the neighborhood actually felt like home. Moving into this neighborhood was supposed to be a fresh start. I had no idea that something as insignificant as a mailbox would turn into an all-out war. But when you're dealing with people like Karen, the HOA queen with a superiority complex, nothing is ever simple. She decided that my navy blue mailbox was a crime against the order of the community. At first, I ignored her passive-aggressive comments, then her official complaints. But when she tried to paint my mailbox white in the dead of night, oh, that was it. That was the moment I decided I wasn't just going to win. I was going to ruin her. The morning after I caught Karen red-handed with her dripping paintbrush, I did the only logical thing. I went out, bought the brightest, most eye-searing shade of red paint I could find, and coated my mailbox with it. In broad daylight. As Karen and her HOA minions watched in horrified silence. It was glorious. She was shaking with rage, her fingers clenched around her clipboard like it was the last thread holding her sanity together. And then, she called the police. On my mailbox. I nearly lost it when the cop showed up. Karen, in her full HOA dictator mode, was practically frothing at the mouth as she explained how my mailbox was ruining the neighborhood's integrity. The officer just stared at her, then at me, then back at her. "Ma'am, this isn't a crime." Karen's eye twitched. "But it's a violation of the HOA regulations. This entire street is meant to have a unified aesthetic." The officer let out a slow sigh, rubbing his temple. "Ma'am, this is a civil matter, not a police matter." The sheer defeat in her eyes was delicious. But I wasn't done yet, not even close. That's when the real revenge started. See, I could have just let it go after humiliating her in front of the cops. But Karen had made it personal, and I don't take personal attacks lightly. So, I started digging. If there's one thing HOA tyrants love more than their little rulebooks, it's power. And power comes from control. But what happens when that control starts to crumble? The first thing I did was read through the HOA regulations, every single page. And guess what? Turns out Karen had been violating her own rules for years. Her fence, 2 inches taller than allowed. Her flower beds, spilled out past her property line onto HOA-owned grass. And best of all, she had an unregistered backyard shed. According to the bylaws, any structure over a certain square footage needed explicit approval from the HOA board. And guess who never got approval? I collected every violation, printed them out, highlighted the regulations in the handbook, and then I anonymously submitted them to the HOA board. The fallout was immediate. Karen stormed out of her house the next day, her phone practically glued to her ear as she screeched at someone, probably another HOA member. A week later, I saw official notices stapled to her fence, violation warnings, fines, a demand to remove the illegal shed. The same HOA she had weaponized against me was now turning on her. But that wasn't enough. No, I wanted her to feel it, to know that she had messed with the wrong person. So, I got the entire neighborhood involved. See, Karen had spent years terrorizing people over the smallest infractions. Your grass is too long. Your garbage cans are out an hour early. Your Christmas lights are 1 day past the deadline. People hated her. They just needed a little push. So, I gave them one. I started a Facebook group, an anonymous one, only for people in the neighborhood. The first post? A collection of Karen's violations. And the comments? Brutal. People piled on. Stories poured in about how she had fined them for ridiculous things. How she had once demanded a neighbor repaint their door because she didn't like the shade of blue. How she had reported a teenager for parking in their own driveway because she didn't recognize the car. And then, the best part? A petition to remove Karen from the HOA board. At first, she tried to fight back, posted in the group under a fake profile, defending herself. But people saw through it immediately. The signatures kept coming in. The HOA had no choice but to call a meeting. I showed up early, sat front and center as Karen sputtered and flailed her way through an explanation about how she was just trying to maintain the integrity of the neighborhood. But nobody was buying it. People were furious. And then, the vote. She lost. Just like that, Karen was kicked off the board. No more power, no more clipboard, no more control. I wish I could say she took it gracefully, but nope. She went full meltdown. screamed about how the neighborhood was going to fall apart without her leadership, how we would regret this, how we were all a bunch of rule-breaking hooligans. The next week, she put her house up for sale. I watched from my front porch, coffee in hand, as she packed up her beige, regulation-approved boxes into a moving truck. She wouldn't even look at me, but I made sure she heard me. I took a big sip of coffee, looked at my beautifully red mailbox, and said loud enough for the entire street to hear, "Goodbye, Karen. Don't let the HOA rulebook hit you on the way out." And just like that, she was gone. The neighborhood? Better than ever. The new HOA board was actually reasonable. People stopped living in fear. And best of all, I never had to deal with another passive-aggressive notice again. Revenge? Oh, it was sweet. If you had told me a year ago that I would be sitting in a courtroom over the color of my mailbox, I would have laughed in your face. But here I was, in a packed courtroom, my lawyer at my side, while Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of our HOA, sat across from me, a smug look on her face. She had actually dragged me to court for violating community standards. And let me tell you, if she thought she was going to win this, she had another thing coming. The judge, a tired-looking man who had probably seen it all, adjusted his glasses and sighed. "Ms. Karen, you're suing your neighbor because of a mailbox?" Karen shot up from her seat like a cartoon villain, clutching a thick binder filled with documents that no doubt contained every minor infraction she could think of. "Not just a mailbox, Your Honor, a non-conforming, unsanctioned, blatantly rebellious mailbox that ruins the entire aesthetic integrity of our community." I swear I saw the judge blink twice, like he was trying to process whether or not this was real life. But Karen wasn't done. She dramatically flipped through her pages, as if she was about to present the case of the century. According to our HOA bylaws, all mailboxes must be either white, black, or a neutral beige. But this, she pointed a shaking finger at the photo evidence of my crime, is red. A dramatic gasp from Karen's side of the courtroom. Someone even whispered, "The horror!" I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. The judge turned to me, barely hiding his exasperation. "Sir, do you have anything to say for yourself?" I stood up, cleared my throat, and in my calmest voice said, "Your Honor, my mailbox is red." The courtroom fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Karen's eyes widened like she had just uncovered a grand conspiracy. "See? He admits it. He knows what he's done. He doesn't even feel remorse. This is a direct attack on the HOA and everything we stand for." I swear, she looked ready to collapse from the weight of her own self-importance. The judge rubbed his temple, muttering something under his breath. Probably a prayer for patience. "Ms. Karen, do you have any legal grounds for this case?" Karen slammed her binder shut. "Yes, I have evidence. Witnesses. A full breakdown of the psychological damage this mailbox has caused the community." I had never seen a judge look so done. "Psychological damage?" Karen nodded vigorously. "Yes, people have reported stress, anxiety, and emotional distress because of this heinous violation. One of our elderly neighbors even said it reminded her of communism." I couldn't take it anymore. I let out a loud, dramatic gasp. "Oh no, not communism! My mailbox must be stopped!" Karen whirled around to glare at me. "This isn't a joke!" But at this point, even the bailiff was struggling to hold in his laughter. And then came the best part. See, I had done my homework. Karen had spent so much time digging into my so-called violations that she failed to check herself. My lawyer, who had been quietly waiting for the right moment, stood up with a smile. "Your Honor, if I may?" The judge gestured tiredly. "Go ahead." My lawyer walked to the front, holding a stack of documents. "We'd like to present our evidence against Ms. Karen." Karen froze. Her smug expression shattered in an instant. The lawyer continued, flipping through his own binder, one much thicker than Karen's. "Your Honor, we have proof that Ms. Karen herself has been violating multiple HOA regulations for years." Karen shot out of her seat. "That's a lie." But the lawyer was ready. "Oh, let's see. Here we have photographic evidence that her own fence is 2 inches taller than HOA regulations allow. Here's proof that she's been using an unregistered security camera. And here, a petition from at least 10 other neighbors who claim Ms. Karen has personally harassed them over non-existent violations." The judge raised a brow. "Ms. Karen, Is this true? Karen was sweating bullets. And then the knockout punch. The lawyer pulled out one final document and set it on the judge's bench. And here, Your Honor, is an official statement from the HOA itself confirming that the rule about mailbox colors doesn't actually exist. Ms. Karen was misinterpreting the guidelines. There was never a restriction on mailbox colors. The courtroom exploded. Even the judge, who had been struggling to keep a straight face, finally let out a chuckle. So, let me get this straight. You brought your neighbor to court over a rule that doesn't exist? Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. But it should exist. I demand that the HOA immediately amend the rule. The judge slammed his gavel down. Enough! Karen flinched. He leaned forward, leveling her with the kind of look that could make even the most delusional HOA tyrant shrink into their seat. Ms. Karen, you have wasted this court's time with a frivolous lawsuit. Not only is your case dismissed, but I am issuing a fine for abusing the legal system. Karen looked like she had just been hit by a truck. Court is adjourned, the judge announced. The second that gavel hit, the entire courtroom erupted in whispers. Karen stormed out, her face redder than my mailbox, while I took my sweet time gathering my things. The lawyer patted me on the back. I'd say that went well. I grinned. Oh, I'd say it went perfectly. That night, when I got home, I stood in front of my beautifully red mailbox and admired it in the moonlight. Karen's reign was over. The lawsuit had humiliated her. And the HOA? After everything that happened, they were too scared to come after me. The best part? The entire neighborhood started painting their mailboxes whatever color they wanted. And Karen? Well, rumor has it, she moved out a month later. It all started with my mailbox. A simple, harmless red mailbox. But to Karen, the self-proclaimed dictator of our HOA, it was a declaration of war. At first, I thought she was just going to file her usual petty complaints, maybe send a few passive-aggressive emails. I had no idea that this would spiral into an all-out neighborhood war, complete with petty sabotage, backhanded tactics, and an unhinged woman on a mission to destroy me. The first strike came the very next morning. I woke up, grabbed my coffee, and stepped outside to admire my perfectly normal, perfectly red mailbox. That's when I noticed the sticky note slapped onto it. Violation. Mailbox color is not approved by HOA. Fix immediately or face fines. I stared at it, blinking in disbelief. A sticky note? This woman couldn't even bother with an official letter? Just a passive-aggressive sticky note like we were middle schoolers passing rude messages in class? I peeled it off, crumpled it in my hand, and went about my day, assuming that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning, another note. This time, bigger. This one wasn't just stuck to the mailbox. It was taped all over it, like a ransom letter. Final warning, non-compliant, remove or else. Oh, it was on. I left the note where it was, walked back inside, and grabbed my own roll of tape. I wrote my own message in big, bold letters. HOA has no rule against mailbox colors. Please educate yourself before issuing empty threats. And then, with great satisfaction, I taped it directly onto Karen's front door. By that evening, the entire neighborhood was watching. Some people laughed as they walked by. Others took pictures. And Karen? Oh, Karen was livid. I could see her from my window, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin, angry line. And then, things escalated. The next morning, my sprinklers stopped working. I checked the system. Nothing was wrong. Then I noticed footprints in the soil near the valve. Coincidence? Maybe. But then, later that night, my trash bins mysteriously disappeared. Completely gone. Not tipped over, not misplaced. Vanished. And guess whose garage security camera conveniently malfunctioned that night? Karen had officially taken this to another level. I wasn't going to let it slide. So I played my own move. I ordered a bigger, brighter, even redder mailbox. And when it arrived, I installed LED lights under it, so it would glow at night like a beacon of defiance. I even added a tiny speaker that played the sound of an eagle screeching whenever someone opened it. The neighborhood lost their minds. Some people thought it was the funniest thing ever. Others started picking sides, Team Karen or Team me. Karen, she lost her absolute mind. She stormed up to my house, her face so red she might have blended in with my mailbox. "This is harassment,"
she screeched. I took a slow sip of my coffee and smiled. "Oh, so now we're talking about harassment," she was fuming. "I'm calling the HOA. Go ahead." I shrugged. "You are the HOA." She stomped away, muttering about lawsuits. And sure enough, the next day, I got an official complaint letter. Not from the HOA, but from Karen personally. The letter was 3 pages long, filled with all-caps rants about how my mailbox was a nuisance, a distraction, and a threat to community peace. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. And then, the retaliation reached new heights. One night, I woke up to the sound of spray paint cans shaking. I peeked out my window just in time to see a shadowy figure spray painting over my beloved red mailbox. It was Karen. I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture. She was caught red-handed. And the next morning, I printed that picture and taped copies of it all over the neighborhood mailboxes with a caption: Karen, the HOA dictator who vandalizes property at 2 a.m. She was beyond furious. She ran around trying to rip them down before too many people saw. But by then, the whole neighborhood knew. And that's when my neighbors started fighting back. See, Karen had been a menace for years. She had filed petty complaints against so many people. Wrong shade of flowers, mismatched patio furniture, too many birds in someone's yard. But my mailbox war? It was the breaking point. People started revolting. My next-door neighbor painted his mailbox neon green. The guy down the street put a disco ball on top of his. Someone else mounted a mini flagpole on theirs and flew a flag that said, "Not today, Karen." It was chaos. And Karen, she was powerless. She called emergency HOA meetings that no one showed up to. She threatened fines that weren't real. She patrolled the streets like a soldier. But the second she told someone their mailbox was a violation, they just laughed in her face. Finally, one night, she snapped. She went door to door, screaming about how we were all ruining the neighborhood and how she would personally take action. So I did what any rational person would do. I called the cops. When they arrived, Karen was standing in my yard, shaking her fists at my glorious red mailbox. She turned to the officers, her face twisted with rage. "Arrest him! That mailbox is a threat to our community!" One of the cops looked at her like she had completely lost it. "Ma'am, it's a mailbox." She froze. Her mouth opened and closed, her brain short-circuiting. The cop turned to me. "Sir, do you want to press charges for the vandalism?" I crossed my arms. Let's see. Trespassing? Destruction of property? Harassment? Yeah, I think I do. And that was the end of Karen. She was fined, forced to step down from the HOA, and eventually, she moved out. As for the neighborhood, let's just say our mailboxes have never been more colorful. If you ask the people in this neighborhood, they'll all tell you the same thing. It started with a mailbox. A red mailbox, to be exact. But if you dig a little deeper, you'll realize that this was never just about a mailbox. This was about control, power, and one woman's obsession with enforcing rules that didn't even exist. And that woman, her name was Karen. At first glance, she seemed like any other suburban homeowner. Middle-aged, neatly dressed, always clutching a clipboard like it was some kind of sacred text. But talk to anyone who had lived under her HOA reign of terror, and you'd hear the stories. The fines for having the wrong kind of flowers in the front yard, the threats over Christmas decorations that were too gaudy, the surprise inspections where she would just show up and start measuring grass lengths. If there was a rule, real or imaginary, Karen would enforce it. But the red mailbox? That was her breaking point. I first realized something was off the morning after I installed it. I stepped outside with my coffee, took a deep breath of the crisp morning air, and there it was, a sticky note, plastered right in the middle of my brand new mailbox. The message? Short and aggressive. Violation, non-approved color, remove immediately. I blinked at it. Then I checked my HOA rulebook, flipping through every page. Nowhere did it say mailboxes had to be a certain color. So I did what any rational person would do. I ignored the note, crumpled it up, and went about my day. But Karen, she didn't ignore it. The next morning, another note. Bigger this time, and taped with what had to be an entire roll of Scotch tape. This one had bold letters screaming at me about how my mailbox was a disruption to the neighborhood aesthetic. It was hilarious. At first, I thought it was just Karen being Karen, but then things started to escalate. I woke up to find my trash bins missing. Gone. Not tipped over, not moved, completely vanished. When I checked my security cameras, conveniently glitched out during the exact time frame they disappeared. Then, my sprinkler system failed overnight. When I went to inspect the valve, I found footprints in the dirt. I started to realize this wasn't just some petty complaint. This was a campaign of intimidation. And then one night, I heard the sound of spray cans shaking. I looked out my window, and there she was, Karen, standing in my driveway, spray painting over my mailbox like some kind of HOA vigilante. That's when I knew. This wasn't about the mailbox. This was war. What followed was a neighborhood rebellion unlike anything anyone had ever seen. It started small. My next-door neighbor painted his mailbox bright neon green. Then another painted theirs hot pink. Soon, it was a full-blown protest. A disco ball mailbox? Check. Someone mounted a tiny spotlight to illuminate theirs at night? Done. Another guy installed a motion-activated speaker that blasted dramatic music whenever someone walked by. Karen? She lost it. She started running around the neighborhood, screaming about non-compliance and ruined property values. She sent out mass emails, demanding people revert their mailboxes to neutral tones. No one listened. Then, she tried to retaliate. One by one, mailboxes started getting vandalized. Spray paint, scratches, even outright theft. And the moment someone set up security cameras, guess whose car was caught on camera at 2 a.m. lurking in people's yards? Karen had crossed the line. The footage spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People printed screenshots and taped them to their mailboxes. Someone even made t-shirts. And the HOA? Well, turns out, they weren't too happy about their president getting caught defacing private property. And then, the final blow. We voted her out. In one glorious, packed-to-the-brim HOA meeting, the neighborhood stood together and voted her out of power. Her reign of terror? Officially over. Karen? She moved out not long after. And the mailboxes? They've never been more colorful. It started with a mailbox. Just a simple change. An upgrade, really. The old one had been rusting, the wood warped from years of rain and sun. So I replaced it. A modern design, sleek, painted deep red. That was the moment everything shifted. That was the moment I realized my neighborhood wasn't what I thought it was. The first sign was subtle. A note, perfectly centered on the front of my new mailbox. Violation. Just one word, typed in a sterile, impersonal font. No signature, no explanation. I chuckled, assuming it was some overzealous HOA nonsense, and tossed it. But the next morning, there was another note. Remove immediately. The paper was wet from the night's rain, the ink slightly smudged. Still no signature. But the placement, dead center, like the first one, felt deliberate. I checked the HOA guidelines. Nothing about mailboxes, nothing about color restrictions. And yet, the notes kept coming. I started feeling watched. It wasn't obvious at first, just a prickle at the back of my neck when I stepped outside. The sensation of eyes lingering a second too long. I told myself it was in my head, just paranoia. Until one night, I saw her, Karen. She stood on the sidewalk, barely visible in the dim glow of the street lamp, not moving, not blinking, just staring, at my house, at my mailbox. I considered confronting her, but something in my gut told me not to. Instead, I turned off my porch light and watched from the window. She didn't leave, not for minutes, not for hours. That night, I dreamed of red. The next morning, my mailbox was gone, not vandalized, not knocked over, gone, as if it had never been there. But in its place, buried just beneath the dirt where it once stood, was another note. Stop. I checked my security cameras. Nothing. The footage from the night before, corrupted. Every camera, front yard, driveway, even the one inside my garage. Just a black void during the exact hours my mailbox disappeared. I was being played with. I replaced the mailbox that evening, this time bolting it into the ground. But the feeling of unease didn't fade. Every noise outside made me flinch. Every shadow stretched a little too long. Then, the whispers started. At first, I thought it was the wind, a trick of the trees. But as the days passed, the sounds became clearer. A voice, hushed yet deliberate. Not inside my house, but right outside, at my mailbox. Every night, just past midnight, I would hear it. A whispering voice, repeating the same thing over and over. Wrong, wrong, wrong. One night, I decided I had enough. I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, my heart hammering. The whispering stopped instantly, but the street? Completely empty. I scanned the area, every porch dark, every house silent. But when I turned back toward my mailbox, Karen was standing in my yard. She wasn't at the sidewalk this time, not at a safe distance. She was standing right there, 5 feet from me. No expression, no blinking, just staring. I gripped the flashlight, my mouth dry. "What the hell are you doing?" My voice sounded wrong in the silence. She didn't answer, but her head tilted just slightly, a fraction of an inch. And then, in a voice that was too calm, too certain, she said, "They don't like it." A chill slid down my spine. "Who?" She smiled, and then she walked away. That night, I barely slept. Every noise made me flinch. At some point, exhaustion won over paranoia, and I drifted into a restless, uneasy sleep. When I woke up, my mailbox was red again, except I hadn't painted it. I ran my fingers over the surface, the paint bone dry, as if it had been there for years. I tried scrubbing it, but the color wouldn't fade. My hands shook as I stepped back, my mind racing, and then, just as I turned toward my house, a sticky note. This one was different. No typed font, no generic phrasing. It was handwritten, with shaky, almost frantic strokes. "You should have listened." I didn't leave my house that day, or the next. I kept my curtains drawn, my doors locked. But the feeling of being watched never left. My cameras were useless, my phone started glitching, my texts to neighbors went unread. It was as if the entire neighborhood had turned against me, or worse, as if they'd never been on my side at all. I thought about leaving, packing a bag, getting in my car, and just driving. But something deep inside me whispered a warning: they won't let you. Then, at exactly midnight, my phone lit up. A notification from my security system. "Motion detected, front yard." I opened the app, my hands trembling. The feed was black. And then, just for a second, a flash of red. Not a person, not an object, just a blur of deep, pulsing red. And then, silence. Welcome to Neighborhood Nightmares, where we uncover the most scandalous, ridiculous, and mind-blowingly petty true crime cases from the depths of suburban hell. Tonight's case? The Great Mailbox Scandal. A story of power, control, and one woman's obsessive war against color. What happens when a peaceful community falls under the rule of an HOA tyrant who will stop at nothing to preserve the uniform blandness of her neighborhood? Buckle up, because this case has it all. Secret meetings, anonymous threats, a 911 call so absurd it left officers speechless, and a final act of revenge so poetic it changed the neighborhood forever. This is the case of the Red Mailbox. It all started when Jake, an unassuming homeowner with zero interest in drama, made one simple decision: to replace his old, rusty mailbox. The mailbox had been there for years, leaning slightly to one side, its paint peeling under the summer sun. It was time for an upgrade. So Jake did what any reasonable person would do. He bought a brand new mailbox. But instead of the usual beige or white that littered every house on his street, he chose red. A bold, beautiful, statement-making red. Enter Karen. Now, every neighborhood has a Karen, but this Karen was built different. She wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was the self-appointed sheriff of the HOA. The kind of person who memorized every rule, even the ones that didn't exist, and enforced them with the righteous fury of a dictator. She was the type to measure the length of your grass, count the decorations on your porch, and if your garbage can stayed out a minute past pickup, you'd find a handwritten warning taped to your front door. And when Karen laid eyes on Jake's new red mailbox, something inside her broke. Jake didn't realize he had committed a crime, because he hadn't. There was no rule against colored mailboxes. The HOA handbook never mentioned a mandatory shade. But Karen didn't care about rules. She cared about control. The next morning, Jake found a bright yellow sticky note on his mailbox, written in aggressive all-caps letters: "Violation. Remove immediately." Jake stared at the note. No signature, no explanation, just a demand. He shrugged, peeled it off, and tossed it in the trash. Maybe a prank? Maybe a mistake? But the next morning, there was another, bigger, boulder, taped down with enough force to withstand a hurricane. Final warning: non-compliant structure. Immediate action required. Jake, now genuinely intrigued, decided to test something. That night, he sat by his window, watching, and at exactly 2:13 a.m., there she was, Karen, dressed in her robe, armed with a roll of tape and a stack of warning notes. She crept across the lawn like a villain in a low-budget horror film, slapped another note onto the mailbox, and vanished into the darkness. Jake wasn't about to let this go. The next morning, instead of removing the note, he added his own. A huge laminated sign that read, "Cho-A has no rule against mailbox colors. Please educate yourself before issuing empty threats." And where did he put it? Directly on Karen's front door. Karen, of course, lost her mind. She stormed over, binder in hand, ranting about neighborhood aesthetics and the sanctity of uniformity. Jake calmly asked her to show him the rule that banned colored mailboxes. She flipped through her binder. She scanned the pages. She realized she had nothing. But instead of backing down, she escalated. The next day, Jake found anonymous complaint letters in his mailbox. Flyers urging neighbors to take a stand against neighborhood decay started appearing on porches. Karen even tried rallying support at the HOA meeting, but no one cared. So Karen did the only thing left to do. She called the police. Now, imagine being a 911 operator taking this call. 911 operator. 911, what's your emergency? Karen. Yes, hello, I need to report a code violation. 911 operator. A what? Karen. My neighbor has pause for dramatic effect. A red mailbox. 911 operator. Ma'am, that's not a crime. Karen. It should be. But somehow, she convinced them to send an officer. Jake was mid-sip of his coffee when 2 patrol cars pulled up in front of his house. 2 officers stepped out, looking confused. Karen stood across the street, arms crossed, looking victorious. One officer approached. Sir, we've had a complaint. Jake, holding back laughter, set his coffee down. Let me guess, the mailbox? The officer sighed. The mailbox. Karen bolted across the street, binder in hand. It violates the community standards. It's a disgrace. The officer cut her off. Ma'am, there's nothing illegal about a red mailbox. Silence. Karen's face turned 7 shades of red. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. And then, she did the unthinkable. She tried to paint the mailbox herself. At 3 a.m., Jake's security camera captured Karen sneaking into his yard with a can of white spray paint. The footage? Pure gold. Jake sent it to the HOA board. He sent it to the entire neighborhood group chat. And then, for the grand finale, he posted it online. The video went viral. Overnight, the entire neighborhood turned against Karen. And the best part? People started painting their mailboxes different colors just to spite her. Blue, green, yellow. A rainbow of rebellion. Karen? She broke. She packed up, sold her house, left. And the mailbox? It stayed. So what's the moral of the story? Sometimes the pettiest battles spark the greatest revolutions. Sometimes standing your ground against unnecessary control leads to real change. And most importantly, never underestimate the power of a red mailbox. If you love this story, hit that subscribe button because we have plenty more wild HOA battles, entitled neighbor sagas, and true crime cases so absurd you won't believe they actually happened. Drop your own ridiculous neighborhood horror stories in the comments, because let's be real, we all have one. Turn on notifications, because next week, we're diving into the case of the neighbor who tried to charge rent for the sidewalk in front of their house. You don't want to miss it.